A painful incident. Baruch had occasion to notice that despite the great and wide beneficial influence that Talmud Chaim had left behind him in Yanovich, there still existed some of the old spirit among the scholars of looking down upon the uneducated to the extent of treating them with contempt and ridicule. Such an instance was the following. It happened on a Monday, at the time of the reading of the Torah. Shlomo the baker, or Shlomo of Vitebsk, as he was sometimes called, rushed into the Beis HaMedrash and immediately began to daven on his own, as the minyan was far ahead of him. Shlomo was a simple man, but a God-fearing Jew who was sincere in his every action, and certainly in his prayers. The Shamash had not noticed that Shlomo was davening independently, and was at a point where he should not be interrupted, and called him up to the Torah. Shlomo went up to the Torah, after which he returned to his place and continued with his davening at the point at which he had left off. When some of the fellow worshippers saw him taking his tzitzis and reciting the Shema, they realized he had made a break at an inappropriate point, and so they decided to have some fun at his expense. As soon as the service was over, they crowded around the innocent and unsuspecting Shlomo, calling him names and deriding him for his appalling ignorance. "Shame on you, you ignoramus! Don't you know that you dare not interrupt the Shema? So instead of giving honor to the Torah, you desecrated it." Shlomo was mortified. It must have indeed been a terrible crime he had committed, if even the great scholar and social leader of Yanovich, Yaakov Yitzchak, was among those who were deriding him and scoffing at his ignorance. Poor Shlomo was in tears. He began pleading with Yaakov Yitzchak to tell him in what way he could atone for his great sin, unintentional though it was. Nothing would be too hard or too painful for him to do, if only it would wipe out his offense against the Torah. "Don't you realize what a terrible sin you have committed?" said Yaakov Yitzchak to the unhappy man. "You have insulted the Torah and taken God's name in vain." Baruch, who was watching the scene, was horrified to find Yaakov Yitzchak behaving so meanly, and he was terribly distressed to see poor Shlomo's agony of shame. Tears stood in the baker's eyes as he begged Yaakov Yitzchak to tell him how he could possibly atone for his unwitting transgression. "The only way to purge you of your dreadful sin is for you to fast," said Yaakov Yitzchak to him sternly. In his awful misery, the poor baker did not see that he was only being laughed at. "I shall commence my fast at once," said Shlomo to Yaakov Yitzchak, eager to show his readiness to atone for his sin. "You ignoramus," retorted Yaakov Yitzchak. "Don't you know that a fast of an individual must be arranged before Mincha on the previous day? It is a disgrace that we must put up with such ignorance." And off he went with his cronies, all laughing as if enjoying a grand joke. The poor baker's discomfiture was pitiful to behold, and just as Baruch was wondering what he could say to comfort him, a young man stepped up to Shlomo, put his hand on his shoulder, and said to him, "Don't you worry, my friend. You have done nothing wrong. It was quite in order for you to interrupt your davening at the place you were up to, and you have done nothing to offend the Almighty. On the contrary, He is much more likely to accept your honesty and sincerity than the mean attitude of Yaakov Yitzchak." Baruch saw it was Avram Yitzchak, the third son-in-law of Mordechai the miller, who spoke so kindly and feelingly to Shlomo, and he felt he would so much like to learn more about this splendid young man. Shlomo was so moved by Avram Yitzchak's desire to console him that the tears just flowed down his cheeks unchecked. "Why do you cry?" asked Avram Yitzchak in surprise. "I am reminded of a somewhat similar happening which occurred in my youth," replied Shlomo, wiping his face with his handkerchief. "But you probably have no time to listen to my story," he continued. "You must have more important things to do." "No, indeed, I haven't. Do, please tell me. I am most interested," said Avram Yitzchak, anxious to cheer the baker and help him forget the nasty experience he had just been through. "My father was quite a scholar," began Shlomo. "He was a well-known Malabed in Vitebsk and greatly respected as a God-fearing Jew. He used to go to daven every morning at the old Beis HaMedrash, and when I was about 10 years of age, he began to take me with him. Once, when I was about 12 years old, I was davening one day when I had looked out the window. Something distracted my attention. I forgot I was in shul and got lost in thought. Suddenly, I recalled where I was and wanted to resume my prayers, but of course, the minyan was far ahead of me, and in order to finish at the same time as they, I had to skip quite a piece. For some days my consciousness troubled me. I didn't know what to do. I felt I ought to tell my father. Then I thought it would be a worse thing to upset him than the fact of having missed some part of the service. In any case, I argued, I am not yet bar mitzvah, so it is not really so serious. When Yom Kippur came around and my father was invited to give a sermon, of all subjects, he chose to speak about the importance of being sincere and of the wickedness of hypocrisy. He spoke so feelingly and so earnestly that I just felt as if he knew all about my sin and was talking directly to me. As soon as I could get him on one side, I told him what had happened. He was very stern with me and made me promise that I would never again do such a thing. He said I must always daven out of a siddur, not take my eyes away from the words, and then I would not be distracted by anything that might be going on around me. I can honestly say that I have since followed that advice without exception. My poor father, God rest his soul, wanted me to become a scholar like him. But unfortunately, he became very ill and died when I was but a lad of 14. Being the eldest, I had to help my mother keep the home going, and when soon after she died, too, I had the whole responsibility of supporting my poor little orphan brothers and sisters. I saw to it that my brothers should be able to go to yeshiva and help my sisters get married. You can guess it was no easy task for me, and though I did not mind the hard work, I always regretted that I had no time to continue with my studies. I spent my leisure time saying Tehillim and davening, and though occasionally I dipped into a Gemara, I never had time to learn Shulchan Aruch. That is why I did not know the din regarding interrupting my davening. But you must be tired of my taking so long, Shlomo said suddenly. Not at all. Do carry on, Avram Yitzchak assured him, and Baruch nodded in agreement to show that he too was most interested to listen. Thus reassured, Shlomo continued, I worked as a baker, and believe me, it was no easy work. The hours were long, and as you know, it meant mostly working at night so there would be fresh bread and cakes in the morning. Eventually, I earned sufficiently to get married, and that, I think, is all there is to my story, Shlomo concluded. The whole painful incident left a profound impression upon Baruch. His heart grieved for poor Shlomo, whom he saw literally writhing in agony under the impact of Yaakov Yitzchak's cruel jest a little while ago. Baruch would have felt badly enough about such a scene under any circumstances, but what disappointed him more than anything was to see the great Yaakov Yitzchak, one of the most respected leaders in the Jewish community of Yanovich, taking such an active part in the persecution of the simple, honest, if illiterate, Shlomo the baker. More particularly, as Baruch knew the interesting background and past of this same Yaakov Yitzchak.